Evening. Now, my name is Tony Babbitt, and I'm Dean of the College of Business at University College Dublin, and I'd like to welcome everybody here this evening. I know we've quite a broad swathe of people here. Many are graduates of the College of Business, but I know there are a range of graduates from other schools in UCD, and you're very, very welcome here this evening. Now, we have a number of items on our agenda for this evening. We are going to make two awards in the course of the evening, and we're also going to have a panel discussion. The first award that we will be making is to a graduate of our EMBA program from 2015, Sharon Cunningham, who has been awarded the AACSB Influential Leader Award. And Gerald will making an announcement in a few minutes, just talking about that award in a little bit more detail. But in a nutshell, about 8 years ago, the AACSB began to realise that it was really important that business schools acted as change agents, and that they had embedded in their mission a desire to actually have a societal impact. So that's impact, including the research, education activities, but beyond that, in making society a better place. And to support that initiative of AACSB, they instituted a special series of awards which are held every year. Now, there are about 950 schools in the AACSB. From those, only 25 people are selected to be awarded with this award every year, Influential Business Leader. So we're very delighted to have you here this evening. Now, a little bit later on today, after the panel discussion, we'll be making a second award, which is to the person who did best on the marketing side of things in our BCom degree in 2022, and she'll be awarded with the Liam Glynn Award. Now, she's delayed a little bit due to pressures of work, which is not a bad thing, but so we'll be pushing that award ceremony back until after our panel discussion. Now, I'd also like to say a very big welcome to all members of our panel this evening. And as you'll have seen on the invite that went out, the panel is going to focus on issues of technological change. And there isn't anyone in this room that's unaware of the major changes that are taking place in terms of technology. And certainly we've all been looking at ChatGTP and Bard and so on, and thinking of the implications of that over the last couple of months. Now, as with many technological changes, of course, these technologies have not occurred overnight. And I can certainly remember going back to the early 1980s working with generative systems. We didn't call them generative AI systems at that time, but there were the beginnings of automatic programming systems dating from that. And then moving into the 1990s, a massive literature in computer science arose in the evolutionary automatic programming. So what we're seeing happening now is not new, but in essence, we've seen several items come together which make this technology particularly explosive at this point. We're seeing the availability of data. A very big driver of that, of course, has been the advent of the mobile phone. There's more data available on any of us than there ever was before. And also, because we have a mobile computing device with us, we're interacting with services over the internet ever more heavily than we were before. And of course, data has been generated by that process. Obviously, we've had technological change and technological advance, and also we've had the connectivity that's been created by the internet. So if you want to go to academic model to read about this, the one I'd refer you to actually is Self-Organized Criticality, backs papers on what is known as sand pile theory. And in sand pile theory, you have a pile of sand, you drop individual grains of sand onto that sand pile. And as you drop most grains, nothing happens. But every so often you drop a grain and suddenly there's a huge avalanche off the pile of sand. And for those that love mathematics sitting here, I'm looking at one of my old friends there, Paul Talon down the back, who's joining us this evening from Baltimore. It follows a power law. So the key message coming from it is that even apparently small events can have a really, really significant impact on the environment depending on how everything is structured at the time that small event occurs. And that's what we're seeing at the moment with ChatGTP. It's not a brand new technology which arrived out of nowhere in the last 6 months, but a whole pile of supporting events having taken place over previous decades. And the launch of this technology then has been literally the grain of sand that has dropped on that sand pile and caused an avalanche. Now, it's pretty interesting from our point of view as educationalists as what impact this is going to have on our courses. I'm not even talking about assessment, and we could talk about that, but what should we be teaching people? What are people going to need to know in the future to have successful careers? Well, that's all up for grabs, and it's going to be really interesting hearing our panel enlighten us about these type of issues in the coming half hour or so.
Good evening. Hi, congratulations. So my name is Alan Ennis. I am the moderator for tonight's discussion on emerging technology and its impact on our lives. I am not a knowledge expert at all. In fact, I just opened my first ChatGPT account to see what it would say when I put my name in. Most of it was accurate, but there was a bunch of errors in there. We'll come back to that in a second. My panelists, Mariah Sheehan is with KPMG, focusing primarily on artificial intelligence and generative AI. Professor Andreas Höppner is a professor with UCD College of Business, focusing on risk, operational risk, risk management, et cetera, et cetera. And Gemma Allen is with IDA Ireland, and she is the vice president of the B2C technology portfolio within that group. So I'm going to start my first question tonight, Mariah, with you. Most of these terms are new to me, so I have to make sure I get my script right. So technology has been evolving, and I think Professor Tony said it earlier, that there's certainly a couple of sand pebbles have fallen recently that have caused an avalanche. And terms that were alien to many of us months ago, hallucination, metaverse, deep fake, are now commonplace in our vernacular. And there's a concern at one level. Should we embrace this? Is it something that we should own and use to our advantage? Is it something we should be concerned about? And so, Mariah, first question to you is, how do you see AI and generative AI changing how people work or how they do business? Is it something to be excited about, to partner with, or to be wary of and treat with apprehension?
Thank you so much, Alan, for that great introduction. So for that question, I guess the first thing I think we should start talking about is if this thing is here to stay, then, which it is, I will say, we need to get comfortable with the reality that it's a possibility the results that come out of a large AI model might be better results than I can produce or somebody on my team might be able to produce. If the answer to that is yes, ChatGPT and the like can do better work than I can in some regards, we need to get comfortable with using it, getting good at scaling it, and it's going to be something that's here. So we need to be comfortable with integrating it into our workforce. When it comes to actual use cases of the technology, I think in the not too distant future, we're going to see some really augmented customer service agents across retail, banking. Specific to banking, I imagine there's going to be quite a bit in the realm of threat detection algorithms and privacy-related technologies that just are going to explode in the market. I think the contact center optimization is going to be one of the biggest places we see ChatGPT and the like being used. So a lot of the times when we're talking with a person right now in a contact center, I think in the not too distant future, we're going to be talking a lot more with virtual agents using conversational AI. To think about treating this as a friend or not so much of a friend, that's an opinion. I think that one thing that comes to mind actually, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing the name of the philosopher, I think it's Kranzberg, but one of the laws of technology that he'd said was, technology is neither good nor bad, but it's not neutral either. So with that in mind, I choose to be optimistic. I choose to think of it as a good thing. I think there's a lot of application for the betterment of humanity using this stuff. I think about, speaking of pharmaceuticals, that's a big area of interest for the field. So I think about the way that experts talk about a thing and then the way that non-experts talk about a thing. There's a big gap. So somebody says, I need to, a specific application might be, I need to refill my prescription for certain pharma. I don't know how to pronounce it. When you start to think about all the different languages people speak in the United States, I don't know how to say that specific medicine. But I know it's my little blue pill, and I know it treats my heart condition. Generative AI can come in, swoop in, and say, oh, you're talking about your Cubrellis. I can send that off to your doctor and get it refilled for you. So I think there's a lot of humanity out there that we can sort of make better with something like this. So I choose to be optimistic about it. With all that considered, all these things are only as good as the data you feed it. So it's only going to be as good as the data you give it. And there have to be really strong guardrails around the applications and the way that you use it. It's all about the governance and how you protect the models with it.
Right, well, we have a section on governance later, which is interesting. Gemma, second question comes over to you. And this is around the impact on diversification, as a human race. As you think about AI quickly reshaping the world, and some will argue it will create a fairer, more equal space for everyone to take part. Others will argue that it will be a place to enable further discrimination, potentially. So in order for AI to be an enabler of equity, it needs to capture diversity of thought across genders, cultures, backgrounds, abilities. So when you think about that, will artificial intelligence solve or worsen the diversity gap?
So I feel the need to say that I'm talking on behalf of Gemma Allen here and not necessarily IDA Ireland. I'm going to caveat this as a public sector member of the panel. But I think there's probably like a fair reason to have an equal level of concern and excitement when it comes to the application of AI for making the world fairer, more equitable. I really think it boils down to two things: inclusion in terms of AI as a concept and how it's deployed, and application in real life. And if you start with inclusion, the reality is that when we look at AI as a technological concept and mass rollouts as they're happening at the speed that they are, one status quo could very easily beget another, in that only 25% of women, or only 25% of engineers that consider themselves AI specific are female. Within that, there's a whole load of nuances around minority. So we know that, these algorithms that have been built and are being deployed at like what feels like the speed of sound are essentially predominantly white male designed algorithms, right? And that's like a real cause for concern. And I think that's something that we have to be very, very mindful of. When we think about application of AI and the point in time they're at right now, I think one really interesting scenario that just happened last week was Levi announced that they're going to actually use avatars to replace Black and minority models on their advertising campaigns. And, they're defending that as an opportunity for Levi to demonstrate that their products and their jeans can be worn by anyone, right? But what that really tells us is that it's putting a bandage on what is a pretty broad problem, and that is, within the fashion industry and within many of these industries the world over, there is a real cause for concern around fair representation and fair opportunity. So, I think when we think about AI, from both a work and societal aspect, there's definitely opportunity for these algorithms to intercept biases, to make things fairer, to, take huge amounts of data, develop patterns, and actually see problems in those patterns that maybe one human can't necessarily see. But I think it really comes back to the fact that for AI to be fair and, of societal good, it needs to be designed and deployed in a way that's equal. And I think that's the challenge right now.
It's interesting that so beyond the gender point, which you well made, there's also an argument that AI will serve to replace lots of the blue collar jobs that we have in the workplace today. And many of those blue collar jobs are folks who are less educated, who've come through different backgrounds, and those jobs are easier to replace by robots and the like. In fact, one of my fellow board members, Aidan Connolly, can you get a microphone to Aidan? Just wrote a book called The Future of Agriculture. And he is none less than an agriculture guru. Come up here, Aidan. But he just wrote a book about the future of agriculture and
we should
the
have
future generation. Tell us a bit about the book as it relates to what we're talking about here.
Okay, I'll try to keep it brief. So I've been writing about blogs on what will happen next with food, what will happen next with livestock, what will happen with crops, and put these together in a book that I released about 10, 12, 3 months ago. It's available free of charge for download. It's, as one of my friends who's over 50 said, the writing is very small. And I said, well, in an ebook, you press a thing in the corner and it increases the size of the text if you really want to be able to. So I talk about drones, blockchain, artificial intelligence. I talk about vertical farms, cellular meats, all these things that we hear about and what are good and what are, and I try not to say, I try to point out the pros and the cons, and particularly to point out the companies that might be interesting for you to research afterwards. So you hit a hot link on the ebook and you go further. The comment you just made is really interesting for me. One of the main things I get asked, I do a lot of keynote speeches on agriculture and future food, and they ask, does this mean nobody's going to be working on our farms in the future? And, you know, that raises a very interesting question, because I think if you look at, I've been to quite a few hospitals, unfortunately, in this country recently, and to see robots going up and down carrying samples from the patients directly to the laboratories, or the doctors who are carrying iPads and smart devices and the sensors that are all around us, and obviously all these other but I don't see less nurses, and I don't see less doctors. And I've tried to use that with farmers to say, don't be worried about the future of your jobs. Your jobs are going to change. These technologies are incredibly enabling. The idea that you could go to UCD, learn agriculture, and 40 years later, 30 years, be relying upon what you remember from that those awful arts building or the BAG. You know, you're remembering what you studied 20 years ago. Will you really remember as well? So these technologies are extraordinary. Yeah, it was. This book is available free of charge, so there's no real promotion here at all. But if you know of anybody anyway interested in the future, please, Agritech Capital. It will be available on Amazon in a few weeks' time. They will charge for it. But in the meantime, agritechcapital.com, you can download the book as an ebook. So thanks for that.
Good, thank you. Thanks, Aidan. Andreas, question for you. So ChatGPT, let's stay there for a second. Buzzword for sure. Is it revolutionary deep learning, or is it a hyped machine imitation?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily better, but it's much, much faster. It's the fastest ghostwriter that we have. If you want to put an event schedule up, it will write that in 2 seconds. No one can do this. It's very important to think when we talk about deep learning what it actually is. Confucius sees 3 ways of learning: learning by imitation, learning by experience, and learning by reflection. And ChatGPT is a machine imitator. It has an enormous amount of power, but the actual statistics are purely imitating. That's why it gets the facts wrong so many times, because it imitates, and if the facts are not very well known, it's hard to imitate anybody. And anybody can see this. If you come to one of my classes, try to train a neural network, the neural network will happily learn a correlation of 2 or minus 1.3 unless you tell the neural network that that's impossible. Correlations don't go above 1 and don't go below -1. And so in principle, it imitates us. It's extremely fast, but it's not necessarily automatically clever. And that means that the use cases, for some use cases, fantastic. So artificial intelligence, take the first 3 letters art. If you do deep fake with AI, it's beautiful because none of us will see the errors. We don't know when it errors. Itself knows when it errors, but we don't. But try to actually classify, if I can take your example, that pill. If it gets that one wrong, that could be a very, very bad press story. So, and that is the actual risk here, right? So if you train a neural network, you need to be able to prioritize one error over the other. So either ignore false positives to an extent or ignore false negatives to an extent, or preferably, you're in the art space, deepfake, you can ignore both errors. That's great. But whenever these errors are a matter of life or death, it gets really, really risky. And I personally don't believe that we see actually much more than a new set of hype. One final number, if I may, as a finance professor, Microsoft controls a good bit of OpenAI. Share price hasn't moved at all. NVIDIA, which is the basic AI bet, doubled since the beginning of the year. So the markets are betting on an AI hype or an AI development rather than specifically on the ChatGPT program.
Interesting question for the group. Show of hands. How many of you actually have a ChatGPT or OpenAI account either on your laptop or on an app? So 25, 30, maybe 40%. And what do you use it for? Do you use it for work? Do you use it for a chat-up line for the girl at the bar? Do you use it to write your college essay? Give me some examples of what you've used your ChatGPT or OpenAI account for. Back of the room, Tom.
I've used it to generate questions for panels, just like this.
I did not do that. What else? What other uses? Yes, sir.
I use it to help me write a business requirements document.
Okay. Business requirements document. Owen.
A guy at work that was an intern for me last summer wanted a into ChatGPT, and it got 80–90% of the way there using bullet points that he had sent me. So it saved me 5–6 hours.
It's interesting. One of our board members, John Gardner, who was here earlier, he works with Skadden Arps law firm, and he's found that some of his clients are now doing some of the research about a particular litigious matter through ChatGPT. They're putting the problem into a ChatGPT box. They come up with it comes up with an answer, and then they send that answer to the law firm to either validate or test it. So they're not paying the junior level clerks to come up with the research data. ChatGPT is doing that for them, and then they're sending it to the law firm to critique. So it's much more partner level work at the law firm because of this in that specific regard. Interestingly, I opened my first account 2 weeks ago in anticipation of paneling this discussion, and I put my name into the prompt box to see what would happen. So I put Alan Ennis, and it said, please tell us a little bit more about you. So I just put down Alan Ennis Revlon. And so back in the day, I was the CEO of Revlon, but it correctly pointed out lots of things about my career that were accurate. But it also said that I worked with Nestle and PepsiCo, which I didn't. So then I said, I put in, I did not work with Nestle or PepsiCo, and I put my prompt in again, and they came up with a whole new set of information about me, how I was raised in Ireland, and my father was from Tipperary, my mother was from Cork. It was a whole new data fact, again, much of which was correct, but said, and he's held senior positions with Johnson & Johnson. I didn't. But it's interesting how, to Andreas's point, you know, how it's only as intelligent as the data that it has, and so there's a skepticism around data accuracy, which we'll come back to in a second. Question for you: you talked about governance, particularly as it relates to governance in financial services. There's the ISO has come out with new standards around what risks are and controls need to be in place around the auditing structure. In financial statements particularly. So how do we appropriately govern and build safeguards around the technology?
Absolutely. So with AI and building a control framework around it, it's a very new emerging field. There's a lot of enormous opportunity here. So, the ISO has just come out with a standard in January of this year that says, these are the things you need to have in place for your AI systems at your organization in order to make sure that you have responsible AI in place. There are regulations all over the place depending on your geography. So the US has some, the EU absolutely has some, and every geography on Earth has some sort of regulation in place around AI and what we should do to make sure it's working the way it should be working. So thinking about that, and I guess to be more specific, thinking about why that's important, a company like Meta or Google or Twitter, any of them, they're making money off of ads, usually. And there are ML AI in place to push certain ads up top, push other ads elsewhere. They have ML in place to make sure that there aren't spam clicks happening on those ads because they're making money every time you click. And so there's AI pushing the ad, and then there's AI making sure the ad is being used appropriately to make them money. So if an auditor is going to come down the road eventually, which I would anticipate is going to happen, and ask, why are you making money off of these certain clicks? Like, how is the AI deciding to do this thing that's making you money, it's impacting your financial statement? You have to be able to explain at a granular level why each AI input is reaching each AI output. And that's what all this regulatory work is trying to get to, is some sort of framework. So when I think about a framework here, and actually KPMG, small plug, has a guild that's growing internally, and it's a line of work that we're hoping to push forward. It's called Responsible AI. And the framework largely, as I understand it, is 3-layered. So first off, you have to know why you're using AI at your organization. You have to have a reason for it. You have to be able to back up that reason. Why are you using AI instead of a person doing this job or some other type of system that isn't AI? It's more like rules-based. Second, you need to know how it's working. So how is this system working at your organization? And then third and finally, you need to have some sort of regulatory body internally making sure it's working appropriately and catching it when it isn't. A good analogy of all this is a driver's license. So we see a red light, we stop. If we don't stop, there could be human loss, there could be property loss, we could hurt ourselves, we could hurt other people. We all know to stop at a red light 99.9% of the time. There are always bad actors though, and you want regulations in place to catch them or to make sure that they're, affected if they aren't acting the way responsibly that they should. So that's a big part of governance, yeah.
So staying on that, Gemma, kind of a hospital pass to you. Is there a growing distrust between society and technology? AKA Arnold Schwarzenegger and all that stuff with what was that movie? Terminator 1, Terminator 2, Terminator 3.
Like, I would have to say yes, but I mean, it's not necessary. Well, first of all, the technology industry is actually the third least trusted industry in the world, statistically, just to say. It comes after healthcare and financial services, which is quite surprising because I think tech gets a lot of hype and a lot of noise. But yeah, I think that the truth is there's definitely a growing distrust for tech, especially large tech. I think it's down to a couple of things. I think at the core of it is the idea that, in 2014, Eric Schmidt said that, and we're going back to Mario's point earlier, technology as opportunistic as it is dangerous. And that was before Cambridge Analytica, before mass cyber attacks, before TikTok, before all of the things that have happened in the last couple of years that have really ramped up, our kind of public consciousness around what big tech is and how it's impacting our day-to-day lives. But I think also this idea that we're in the cusp of a fourth industrial revolution, and technically you could say that the future is going to be less human, and that's going to be led by tech, and I think that presents a threat to society. So of course people are less trusting of that. And I think the final point I make on this, I think it's a really important one, is when you look at some of the statistics around how people measure technology and their trust in it, one area which really, really, is alarming is how people think about the technology impacts on their children. And a lot of, people would say that they would use some of these platforms for themselves, but they wouldn't necessarily want their kids on them, right? So the idea that, technology is now becoming more and more of an ad business, and it's targeting the human psyche, it's targeting topics like body image, confidence amongst young children, all of those things that seem somewhat kind of draconian, I think, and aren't really being addressed at the right level, I think, with the right level of transparency. It's causing, further concerns. So yeah, I would say there is a growing deficit, and I think it's probably going to continue for quite some time.
Well, it's interesting. So for those of you that did not open a ChatGPT or AI account, I suggest you do and get on that bandwagon. It's interesting. I have 3 teenagers. My middle child, Timothy, is a junior in high school, and he recently submitted an essay that was created entirely with ChatGPT. He put the prompt into, I didn't even know we had an account, by the way, so bad parent. And he sent the essay in, and his teacher called me and said, Timothy's using ChatGPT to create this answer. I didn't know what it was, or that he was doing it. He denied it. Anyway, he's 17. What are you going to do? But it's interesting. So part of the college application process, as you most of you know, is in the States, is that there are 7 standard prompts, and you have to write an essay. And the essay is a kind of an important part of your application process in the college system here, along with your SAT scores and your GPA and your volunteer work. And they're supposed to be very unique and specific to you. People are now using ChatGPT to create their college essays, or at least a framework, to an earlier point, a framework of what I want to write, and then I'm going to change it, spot the specific errors in there, because I can tell them, and then change it. So my college essay process becomes a lot easier. So I actually asked one of the teachers in school, I said, how are you dealing with that? How are you identifying what's real and what's not real? And although the high school academic system, certainly in this country, is particularly strong, they're not yet prepared to deal with it because many of them don't know what it is yet. Back to the grains of sand on the sand pile. Let me ask a question to Owen Dewan, who sits on our board down here, and to Gemma. This is a hospital pass again. But when you think about it, both of you work in investing in technology companies. I'm going to ask you first to give him a chance to think about an answer. When you think about, and this you can take your IDA hat off, but in the context of investing in technology, particularly around artificial intelligence and the space we're talking about, what do you look for?
In terms of how we think about targeting companies?
Yes.
I mean, all of the main, we basically look for the big dogs, I suppose, to start because they bring the cluster with them, right? So, the fact that Ireland has had such a huge technology cluster for the last 10 years and companies like Meta and Amazon and Google and all of those kind of massive titans of industry have laid down roots in Ireland, created this very large cluster around them because all of their ancillary ecosystem started to co-locate into like locations like, London and Dublin to be closer to them, right? Different parts of Ireland. So, what we really look for is growth, like fast growth, right? And, signals around kind of large revenue raises, things like that. Things that basically tell us that these companies are like very, very serious and are probably going to be around for a while. So, so that's, I guess in essence, that's it. We look for, in the role I'm in, we really do try and target the big dogs.
Oh, and do you have a point of view on what you look for as an investor?
Thanks for putting me on the spot.
I'm happy to do it.
Appreciate it. So what we're focused on is companies that are like, for want of a better term, the picks and shovels of the industry. So we're not going to invest in ChatGPT, right? It's much too big, and Microsoft's already got that one. We're not going to go and choose what's the next large language model business that's going to win. 'Cause no one's smart enough to figure that out. But there are a lot of businesses that create programming languages which allow you to sit on top of multiple large language models to create software and useful tools. Chatbot businesses, like you mentioned, that are going to replace contact center workers. So all the picks and shovels of the industry, where you don't have to pick which ChatGPT or Bard or which one's going to win, but which can sit on top of all of them. Because I agree with the first speaker. I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Mariah.
This is not going away. This is 80 to 90% of the talk and the buzz in technology and investment right now is around AI, and it feels much more real than crypto or blockchain ever was.
Interesting. All right. So I have one final question for this group, but before I ask them the group, any questions from anyone in the audience? We'll come back to this in a second. But any comments, questions, observations? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think we talked before about the fact that there's a regulatory landscape as well. And there, I mean, we do want to use it, but the regulators, they're way behind. They're not comfortable with it yet. So a lot of it has to be implemented, can't be replaced. So to the point about you'll always still need the human involvement, because a lot of this, I think, is quite a few steps behind in protecting the heavily regulated landscape.
I think you sent a note earlier that Italy banned GPT.
Italy just banned it, yeah. But that's,
You banned it, but go ahead.
It's due to privacy laws they banned it. Some people see a different views on why they banned it, maybe protecting some jobs. They're the only ones who banned it to date. Obviously, there is a big letter out to stop some of the underlying research on the machines, which may not happen, but creates further hype. So, yeah.
Yes, sir.
So there's a pretty unanimous consensus up here that this is the next thing, in some capacity, whether it's just sort of hype or whether it's product implementation. Stepping away from sort of the regulatory environment that could potentially slow this product line or future kind of concept. Are you hearing anything? Any experts in the field saying no, this is not going to be the next big thing, actually?
I think it was always there. So if you speak with Google Speaker or Siri, it does more or less the same thing that ChatGPT. It was just not hyped in the same way you type it in that program. But you can ask Google Speaker to talk about Alan, and they'll give you a pretty concrete answer read from Alan's website. And it'll make a lot less errors than ChatGPT does, because ChatGPT compiles it from all sorts of places. So ChatGPT was a clever way of putting this out very much on the conversational AI side. It's kind of the marketing cherry on top of the technology that has been building over the last couple of years. It's very good when you can ignore both errors. That's my personal view from a scientific perspective. When you can deprioritize one error is pretty good, although you still have to have an eye. Whenever you can't decide between which of the two errors is more important, then it's a big, big problem. And whenever the decisions are life and death, then it's another big, big problem. So to take a not ChatGPT example, but Uber hitting that unfortunate woman in Arizona with the self-driving car, up to a split second before it hit, the algorithm switched between Woman, bicycle, nothing. Woman, bicycle, nothing. Any human driver would have slowed down to look what it is because there's a risk here. It didn't do that. It actually didn't really react. And it took over a year, as I understood earlier today from a discussion with a colleague who worked for the ministry at that point, for them to even clarify why it did what it did. Like it's extremely difficult to engineer a machine learning neural network. It's nearly impossible. That's the big problem here, even for the people who build it. And so we're in a situation where what we really need is humble AI. We really need an AI that says, in the last 1% of the cases, I'm actually not going to decide. I put on the warning lights, I slow down, the same way a human would do this. But now that's where the venture capitalists are not entirely happy, because that doesn't lead you to 100x. So you actually, the reality of building a machine learning system is, and I'm making up the numbers roughly, but most machine learning engineers will probably agree, to get to 80% is one step of work. To get to 90% is as much work as you had before from 80 to 90. To get to 90 to 95 again doubles the work, and to get to 95 from 98 again doubles it. So essentially 2 to the power 4. And the last 2%, honestly, you'll never make it, because that's just the randomness in the process. Now, that really then comes to the question, what's your use case? And that's where deepfake is actually one of the biggest risks, because deepfake is art. None of us can see where the error is in the deepfake. If I'm classifying certain aspects in an accounting process, experts can tell you where the error is, and so everyone will be skeptical. But on deepfake, it's extremely difficult to see. And I mean, well before ChatGPT got hyped, we had, for instance, the mayor of Berlin talking supposedly to the mayor of Kiev, but it actually was a Russian bot, and so forth, right? And that happened with a lot of mayors in Europe. So I personally am most concerned about deepfake, because that will get a lot of people in problems. Imagine a deepfake where it's not a prominent person but yourself, right? Yourself suddenly talking to your partner and saying something that you never intended to say. That can become really difficult. And so...
Like I love you.
Yeah, or you may say the opposite. So imagine a deepfake on a Zoom of a normal person. All you need to do that is enough material of the person on camera somewhere. So take myself, put myself in Google Video, that's probably just not yet enough hours to get a deepfake that's properly. But if I double or triple the amount that I would be on YouTube, that would probably be enough. And so, personally, without taking too much time here, I think that is the biggest risk, because it's a very simple thing. What we're doing underlying is a classification. And the classification always has a false positive or false negative. If you can ignore both, it's fantastic. If you can deprioritize one of the sides, it's okay. If you can't really, it's not really going to be the big thing. So, yeah, I close here.
Yep. Other questions before I ask my last question? Yes, back of the room.
Since the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, and probably the first time since the dot-com bust, we've probably seen some of the tightest credit conditions for not just tech lending, but likely over the next 3 to 5 years, lending in the United States and perhaps across the world in general. You talked a lot about how this is the future. How likely is a lack of capital, lack of credit, lack of cheap financing going to slow down and be a hindrance to this advancement in technology?
Wait, Gemma, why don't you go first and then Andreas?
Yeah, I
That's
think
my role, overruling, but I want to.
I think that's a great question. But I guess, what I would say is, and just from my own lived experience of working with large technology companies for the last 9 years, where there is money to be spent, it will be spent in R&D and innovation, though, for a number of reasons. First of all, because, it's the future of the company. It's necessary, right, for survival, for development, but also because there's a whole load of commercial reasons whereby companies also invest very heavily in RD&I mandates, especially as it relates to international teams, like the teams that they have in Ireland, for example, because it helps on a number of levels in terms of how substance and different things are viewed within kind of large global structures. So, I definitely think that, credit and this looming recession, which doesn't seem to ever actually hit, but has been talked about for what feels like forever now, is a risk. But what we see all the time, when we talk to C-level executives, is money will be spent where there's an opportunity for product development and market advantage, and innovation is kind of key to that. So,
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Sure.
So, given your seat at IDA, you have these major technology hubs in Dublin. Do you see them investing in R&D, or more so acquiring companies that have done the R&D?
honestly, Predominantly, it's the former. So, you know, R&D spend in Ireland has been up year on year, like consecutively for the last decade, and it's substantial. Like we've seen, you know, R&D spend that we had never seen in the past, even throughout 2020 and 2021 when the world was full of ambiguity. You know, the RD&I budgets were huge. I don't know if you saw today, like the news about even corporate tax intake in Ireland and what's kind of, you know, up 27% year on year. A lot of those mandates are actually engineering mandates predominantly, right? So, you know, it's absolutely continuing. Acquisition and M&A is always, you know, a big part of strategy, right? But from an Irish perspective, it's probably less part of the kind of international strategy. For Ireland, it's always about doubling down on substance and building out kind of footprint and actually having IP that's generated in Ireland. So, so it's probably more built there.
Maybe just if I could answer your question, just or at least the way I see it, and going a bit on a limb here, out on a limb. My own view is that the monetary policy actions that have been taken in the US and abroad, it's a short-term, I say short-term, less than 3-year concern, in my opinion. Inflation will get under control. That's what happens. They raise interest rates. Inflation comes under control. There's money sitting on the sidelines, and there has been for over a decade in this country, and it waits until the right timing, and then it'll all plow back in. And that may be faster than 3 years, maybe 1 year, a year and a half. I don't think there's going to be a recession. My personal view. So I think your question is correct. It's a legitimate question for the next 6 to 18 months, but not beyond that.
Isn't that what the Fed said originally?
I don't recall.
So the Fed's raised rates faster than ever before, well before Silicon Valley Bank had the issues. Since the beginning of the year, it went up a lot. And Silicon Valley Bank is just the first symptom as a signature bank. Now, we can all just go through the reporting cycle. So the Q2 reporting, annual results will not be too much affected because of last year's results. But the Q3 quarterlies will very much be affected. And the subprime corporate, not the subprime mortgage, the subprime corporate market is bigger than ever before. So how many of them will actually be able to get through this in Q3, Q4 is a different question. I would personally say we might not have a recession, but certain organizations in Q4 will have a very hard time, and there might be some bumps in the market. Now, that's the nature of fighting an inflation which comes from a war. And we're not really prepared to do that because, of course, the inflation really gets triggered by the shortage in energy supply. So, but to come to your actual question, will that stop the machine learning development? I wouldn't think that the most high potential projects will be stopped. Certainly some projects will be scrapped. Google employees walked out in London today against the job cuts, for instance. But now, as a plug for universities, university research continues and normally continues at exactly the same pace. And a lot of that is academically influenced.
All right, my final question for the panel. Each of you get a chance to answer this. So looking to the future, and it's interesting, Gemma, you brought this up in our prep sessions around what would you tell your children to go and learn in university? What are the skills that are going to be successful in the future? They're different from what they are today, and certainly different from what they were 15 years ago. For example, you know, who's going to need a radiologist 5 years from now? The machine takes the X-ray, machine reads the X-ray, it tells you broke your index finger, off you go. So you're not going to need a radiologist or someone to read an MRI scan or to diagnose whether a tumor is benign or malignant or whether you have a tumor or not. So where do you go? That's my opinion, by the way. So where do you go and send your kids, or what do you go and send your kids to learn? What skills are going to be important in this new world? Anybody who wants to go first? You want to go first? Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. I would be remiss not to mention that my academic advisor from my undergraduate university before UCD, I went to Loyola University, Maryland in Baltimore. And my academic advisor is here, and he also studied at UCD, Paul Talon in the back. So what first comes to mind for me is the fact that I started with such a holistic education in a Jesuit university. I was taking alongside programming courses and analytics courses and computer science courses. I was also taking Italian, history, biology, and other things. So I was getting a well-rounded education, and I think it really propelled me quite a lot, especially entering the workforce. I was able to have conversations with all types of people. And in the business world, especially in the technology field, that's very valuable to be able to talk to people and also be able to talk to the technology. Today, though, thinking forward, I mean, I don't think there's always going to be a need for a doctor. There's always going to be a need for an engineer to build the bridge. Even if a computer's doing it, somebody's going to be there to make sure it's doing it the right way. I don't think there's ever going to be a world where the human is not in the loop. So engineers, doctors.
What about a pilot for a plane? Is a plane going to need a pilot?
I don't know. I'm not comfortable getting on a plane without a pilot in the cockpit.
But you won't know because it'll be deep fake. It'll be Andreas Hutter up there.
A
saying, "I'm your pilot."
hologram pilot. Yeah.
You know, I did an arts degree in University of Limerick and graduated in 2006 as a sociologist. And my mother was like, what exactly are you qualified to do? And at the time I was working part-time at McDonald's in Douglas and Cork. And she was like, well, maybe they'll keep you on full-time. So, you know, I'm definitely not in any position to give anyone career advice. But I would say that, you know, when you think about, and we have conversations about human capital all the time, but I think what's really important, you know, as well as the cheesy line of do what you're passionate about, right? Like if I've got 2 little girls, and I certainly hope I'll be balanced enough to say, you know, follow your passions in this world as long as you can make some money and help me retire, because God knows my husband won't. But, you know, but I think also think about it from the perspective of how learning is changing. Like, you know, a lot of universities across the country at home and even here are thinking about things like transversal skills that are applicable to all different disciplines, you know, things like communication, empathy, you know, intelligible reasoning, things like that really have like mass application. And I think back to the conversation around AI, you know, for me as a mom, what I think is really interesting is we're kind of in a very divisive point whereby we're thinking about, you know, the next generation of you know, the workforce and making sure that they have all of these skills that are like, you know, high in empathy, cognitive thinking, etc. But they're also being raised in a world which is more and more remote. And, you know, we're talking about the metaverse. So, like, how do we balance those two things when we think about advising the next future, you know, leaders? You know, and what is it that we can do to make sure that people are developing the skills for human connection?
Andreas?
So I'm a financial data scientist, and my son likes to watch How to Train Your Dragon, which is maybe a good metaphor. So there's, if he's interested, then I would recommend him to look for 2 things. One is to look really how to understand the algorithms, in particular how to understand security algorithms, like the fact that password should be 20 characters, otherwise it could just be cracked by brute force, and that will be 50 characters when he leaves uni. I think is a very worrying, likewise interesting fact. And then I do believe that I'd like him to see the world through virtual eyes rather than physical eyes. So here in New York, you have a lot of skyscrapers that are pretty big. And I walked by Marsh McLennan, for instance, today, so that would maybe be, 4,000, 5,000 office rooms, maybe 3.5. And JP Morgan might be the same. But when you look at JP Morgan's website, that's actually 665,000 subpages. And the EO1 disclosure for equal opportunity disclosure, that would probably be posted there 45 times under different aspects in the URL. And so we have so much information about who a corporate really is by how they structure the URL. Like, is it run via the marketing department or the HR department, in which language and so forth. And I'd encourage him to look into that, to look at the virtual world the way the virtual world would see it rather than a human sees it physically.
Interesting. So one last point. My daughter is in her first year at UT in Austin in the business school. And I asked her what she's going to specialize in or what she want to do when she moves into her second year. And she said something that's actually, I think, probably will relate to many of you, which is the generation that she's a part of, she's 18, is all about experiential activities. They don't want to own a home. They don't need to own a car. They're not about, you know, buying things. They're about going out for dinner, going out for cocktails, going to a new country, visiting a place, doing something that is an experience with their friends, etc. And so she, at this point, is saying, well, I need to be somewhere where I can make a living with people experiencing something. You know, a restaurant, travel agent, whatever it might be, it doesn't matter, but something in that space as opposed to something that can be automated necessarily by a robot. But anyway, that's it for the panel discussion. Thank you to the three panelists, Mariah, Andreas, and Gemma.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. I'm going to invite the Dean up to present the award that he didn't get a chance to present before we started.
Sure, and I'd like to say a big thank you to the panel. I think we could probably go on for another 2 or 3 hours discussing the ins and outs of.
But cocktails are ready, so we can't do that.
We won't do that. ChatGTP. Just to share a couple of bits of experience we've had in the school already with the technology. Owen mentioned earlier on that he had an intern using technology such as this. We're already using assignments such as write an analyst report. And the students are doing that in their final year using ChatGTP. We've already been seeing some very interesting items coming back on assessments. So we're running a lot of our current assessments through ChatGTP to see how would you do on our assessments if you applied ChatGPT to them. Generally speaking, we're seeing results coming in 80, 90% and above. And what we're looking to do then is to redesign our assessments, not so much to ensure they can't be done by ChatGTP, because it's actually telling us something pretty fundamental about our assessment methodologies that we and every other school and university are using, that perhaps we're testing memory and items like that more than we are critical reasoning skills. For me, I'm optimistic. If you look at the history of humankind, technology and innovation has led to advances, most evidenced in length of life. That's a really, really good indicator in terms of are things better now than they were 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. We will adapt to these new technologies. And in essence, what I think the messages are telling us is that we really go back and look and see, well, actually, what makes us human? Not can we compete with the machines and what machines do really well with computation at high speed, but what makes us different? And that's our source of long-term competitive advantage, frankly. So thank you very much to the panel. We have a few small little gifts that we'd like to distribute as a small token of thanks to everybody.
Thank you so much.
And the final item we have on our agenda for this evening is a presentation of the Liam Glynn Award. And I'm delighted that Claudia Hickey has joined us. Claudia, no doubt, was burning the midnight oil and working very, very hard downtown at your creative design agency. Now, the Liam Glynn Award is awarded every year to the undergraduate student across all of our undergraduate programs who scores highest in the marketing discipline. And just to give you a little bit of background on the award, William Glynn, was a lecturer in the College of Business who unfortunately passed away in the year 2000 at the very, very early age of 40. He had, in his time, done a BCom in UCD, then did an MBS in marketing, studying under Professor Tony Cunningham, who may be known to some members of the audience today. And after that, he worked in industry for a number of years before deciding to take up the academic life, study for his PhD, and came back to join us in the faculty of Commerce in UCD. Joined the faculty in 1992. Now, in the relatively short number of years he was with us on the faculty, 8 years in total, he made a marked impression on the world of academic marketing. So in terms of setting up this particular award, the major contribution to it was made by the American Marketing Association. So in the 7 or 8 years on the international stage, he really made an imprint on the field of marketing, particularly services marketing, and that was honoured then by the American Marketing Association. So this award has been awarded every year since the year 2001. And I'm delighted that Claudia is here to accept the award tonight. Normally we would make this presentation in Dublin, but of course Claudia is working in New York. So we knew that once we were organising this particular event that we would hold the award ceremony here. Now, I know you have decided to advance your career by coming to New York, and you're currently working for a creative design agency, specifically in the area of social media. As with all good networking events, hopefully there will be future career opportunities which Claudia can talk to the assembled brethren about. And I know you're very, very keen to stay in New York and continue to further your career here in the US. So, Claudia, the Liam Glynn Award. And to wrap it up for this evening, I would like to say a big thank you to Bank of Ireland and to Tony Dunn, who I had the pleasure of teaching many years ago. He has kindly given us use of the premises here tonight. We're very, very grateful for that. Now, a very important part of tonight is networking. This is an alum grouping. One thing we're really looking to do in the college is to strengthen our alum network in the US and beyond. We now have nearly 110,000 alums in the College of Business scattered across about 140, 150 countries. And a big drive for us over the next number of years is taken from our new 5-year strategy, which is empower, connect, and create. So we're seeking to empower our graduates as they study with us. We're seeking to connect our students, our alums, our advisory board members, industry, and also connect, obviously, academia and the world of practice. And finally, we're looking to create, and that's shorthand actually for co-create. So a very, very important part for us in terms of designing our programs is to ensure that they are co-created with industry and therefore very, very relevant from a work and employment perspective. Of course, fundamental part of the education process is co-creation in the classroom. Information going both ways, perspectives being shared, and that's more important than ever in this international, diverse world that we live in. That's very, very important to us. And in the context of all of that, investing in our alum base and helping you to create connections between each other is really, really important to us. So events like this are ever so important. So hopefully over the next hour or so, you'll have a chance to meet a few new people, make a few contacts. Some of them may be social, some of them may be professional, but certainly hope you enjoy this evening, and thank you for coming along today.